Henry Kissinger said, "The conventional army loses if it does not win. The guerrilla wins if he does not lose." What we're going to speak about today is how Israel has lost a massive amount of support, really the foundation of support on the right wing. And although has won and will continue to win many battles, it will likely lose the war. Trump announced today hostages are being released and Israel will withdraw. This will occur apparently or supposedly over the next 72 hours. Now, regardless of how many casualties Hamas took, their command hollowed out. Israel's loss of international legitimacy, the international recognition of a state of Palestine, and the radicalisation of many more than every Hamas fighter that was killed. I'd like to bring you back to that first quote. Now, Israel will be desperate to sell this as a victory. But I'll give an example that's closest to my heart. Who won every battle in Afghanistan? Who took out hundreds upon hundreds of high-value targets? But after 20 years, who ultimately won the war? And who survived, now in larger numbers? G'day, legends. I hope you are having a fantastic day. And as the title suggests, we have seen a significant shift in how people not only view the war in the Middle East, but how they view Israel in general. And we're going to go at length, a deep dive into this and what I am observing. Of course, the very beginning of this is brand new information about the release of the hostages that will take place, supposed to take place over the next 72 hours. But the remainder of this video still holds true of we're seeing huge shifts, particularly in the right wing, the conservative side, if you will. And how do I know this? Well, I'm not only a keen observer of world politics, it's what I do for a job, but I've seen the change within myself and how I view this. I've seen the change in my friends. I've seen the change in my colleagues, in all my acquaintances, many of which have had a complete 180-degree shift. Now, I will say my acquaintances, they're typically on the moderate conservative side of politics, firstly due to my military background and also both my work in public and private settings. And my friends, of course, are from these settings. Now, what I've seen, and I think many are seeing this, is a very sharp shift, especially online from the bloggers. And these are the bloggers who are not being paid and those who are less scared of speaking about Israel. I say less scared because no one is truly comfortable speaking about this. We'll talk more about that later on. But I'm also seeing this in everyday people who didn't question anything in the beginning, now asking, what the hell is this? Now, this hasn't resulted, as what people would try and say, but this hasn't resulted in any less hatred, distrust, concern about Hamas or radical Islam. It hasn't resulted in that. Although the accepted position is if you're not all in on one, you're a shill of the other. And this is just a ridiculous level of propaganda and a complete lack of critical thinking. You can also say this is a terror organisation, but what is happening to the people and civilians living here is terrible. You do not have to be one or the other. In a world where we are told everything, including gender, is not binary, but your opinions on war and politics have to be binary, fuck off. But this boils down to the shift that we're seeing to a very simple fact that many have just had enough, or they've seen enough. They've seen enough children blown apart. They've had enough of being told if you speak out against this that you're pro-Hamas or that you're a blue-head protester on the street. Rather than no, maybe these people just don't want to see kids blown apart and be told that we're the issue or I'm the issue, not wanting our civilised society to say that this is normal. You'll get the response, well, every death in Gaza is the fault of Hamas. Imagine if Zelensky, president of Ukraine, targeted and blew up a hospital in Moscow, saying that there was a Russian soldier there, and then said, well, this is Putin's fault. Now, you may find gentle mental gymnastics to get there, and I guarantee you'd find a whole bunch of popular sadists who would love this. But it doesn't mean that it's just or lawful. And international politicians, lawmakers, and media, I wouldn't think that they would find that just or lawful. But when the countries are changed, we see huge changes in people speaking out. What we've seen in the last 6 months, instead of support, has resulted in a complete shift that these individuals and all the way to states view Israel, Netanyahu, but also the Jewish community in general, and how the massacre that is in full view of everyone to see that's occurring in Gaza is influencing this, while the hypocrisy of rules-based order and the laws of armed conflict is echoed throughout the world, but forgotten in a few states. In order to suppress this, now what we see is the words anti-Semitism and criticism becoming synonymous, as well as the words Jewish, Israeli, and victim becoming synonymous as well. If you question anything outside of the official narrative, you'll be plagued by being one of these then words of anti-Semitic, even if you're just asking a question. And if you're asking that question, you can be put as a dangerous agent acting against the state of Israel and the US. And this censorship, this is reminiscent of the 20th century tragedies, which the countries involved should know all about. And I can't think of any single event in the last century that has undermined US soft power or legitimacy as much as the support of a small, internationally insignificant nation in the Middle East seemingly having control over the world's most powerful government, while all the other middling and great powers absolutely detest what is happening. And this is why that core foundation of the right wing is starting their support for Israel is or has been collapsing for several months, but is on just the fumes left of it. It's a few days past the 7th of October, which marked the 2-year anniversary since Hamas launched a combined arms murderous attack into southern Israel from the air, the land, and the sea. And of course, this is not where the conflict started, although propaganda would like to obfuscate the past to such a degree that it seems as if it did. But for the sake of keeping this video on theme and short, let's start there. This murderous, bloodthirsty attack shocked the globe with footage of radical terrorists attacking military bases, festivals, and taking a number of civilian and military members hostage, some of which are still being held today, at least at the time of filming. And it was truly horrifying. This attack, though, still has many unanswered, reasonable questions that have little to no explanation. And you are unable to raise them without claims that you support terrorism. Of course, I believe that truth cannot damage a just cause and that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And it's these sticking points that are leaving many to find other solutions and other answers and lose massive amounts of support. So let's cover the sticking points that many have and why this support is collapsing. These prohibited yet reasonable questions raise serious doubts to the legitimacy of what we are told and what we have seen. And the allegations of false flags, these hold water when you look at exactly what has occurred and why false flags are carried out to create a casus belli or justification of the events that we've seen unfold after the fact. Remember, false flags, this doesn't just mean that they are planned and carried out. It may mean an attack is allowed to go ahead to create that casus belli justification for further intervention. Tucker Carlson's recent series on 9/11 is a good example of this. The reasonable line of questioning is this, that I haven't found any reasonable answers for, that really hold water. How did Israel not know about these attacks when, since the 7th of October, we have seen Israel be able to target a single individual in a third state with an explosive, or an entire network of fighters taken out with pages, or allegedly stream Netanyahu's speech to every mobile device in Gaza, but missed the entire build-up of this? Gaza is and was the most heavily surveilled area on Earth, with cameras, with sensors, with soldiers everywhere, above and below ground. Not only from the Israeli side of the fence, but within Gaza it was said you couldn't swing a cat without hitting an informant for Israel. So how was this massive attack completely unnoticed? Yet in the weeks following, we are to believe Israeli intelligence about a tunnel system in a basement of a hospital without question. It is a paradox that has never truly been explained in any logical sense. Furthermore, we've been made aware that other states warned Israel of looming attacks, and the Times reported that Israel had knowledge of attacks a year prior. Yet a festival full of drunk or high young people was allowed to take place right in the vicinity of this. This has similar hallmarks of Russia's alleged warnings to the US in the days prior to 9/11. Actions on the day also bring in many areas of questioning. Many allege that there were non-standard orders given on the morning of October the 7th, tantamount to stand down. What I will say is some of the reporting on this can be weak, but I'm giving you a rundown of why support is falling apart and that this, for many, is a major factor. As well as there are well-documented cases of Israeli civilians and military personnel on October the 7th being targeted by Israel under the Hannibal Directive. The Hannibal Directive essentially is a doctrine to target Israeli military or civilians to prevent them from becoming hostages. ABC Australia did a well-written investigation into both tanks and helicopters targeting vehicles in the chaos of October the 7th, as well as shootouts being started in civilian houses and areas when negotiations with these hostages were taking place. Well, the hostages and fighters, I should say. Now, regardless of how you see this, it is well documented that Israel has a long history of conducting and denying false flag events. And this reaffirms how many are seeing these events. And this is coming more and more to the forefront of the online information media community. This event triggered the response that we have now seen from Israel over the next 2 years, which was promised to be a limited decapitation of Hamas and a hostage rescue operation that is now widely regarded as a genocide or ethnic cleansing. This limited operation was originally to be completed by Christmas 2023, and I witnessed firsthand the scale of the bombing campaign in those initial days. What was sold as a surgical campaign has resulted in the complete flattening and levelling of entire areas, literally with bulldozers. You may remember that my prediction of IDF casualties ended up being 1/3 of what we have seen. This figure that I gave was in line with many other military analysts. Why were we so overestimated on this? Because we knew the restrictions on lawful war and the danger to infantry in these conditions and the environment they'd be stepping into. Therefore, we overestimated the casualties and we underestimated Israel's use of artillery, mortars and bombs within urban areas instead of infantry. Anyone with knowledge of ideologically fueled fighting realises this not only was unlikely to work, it actually can create and has created more radicalised people globally, especially when it is done in this manner. For every one fighter in Gaza that was killed, many, many more swore allegiance to the cause. I've gone over this in length, but conquering an area or flipping a people is costly, it's expensive, and often, way more often, a failed endeavour. The most successful way to influence neighbours, influence spheres of influence, and then change how people see the world is not through force, it's through seduction. In short, show Gaza, the people living there, what it could be without a radical regime to compel the people for change rather than trying to change this by force. The capitalists had very little success in flipping communist states by force, but a lot of success through the temptation of what a market economy can deliver. Israel's initial unwavering support from conservatives, including myself, was massive. That Israel has the right to defend itself. And this right to self-defence remains true. All states can act in self-defence, but this must remain with our self-imposed limitations, otherwise we sink into the barbarism we currently are witnessing, and of which we accuse other states of committing. And this barbarism of which we say separates us from them. The sheer amount of civilian casualties, children dragged lifeless from buildings, has shocked the world, directly targeting hospitals and refuge areas if there was any suspected Hamas activity, with little to no evidence actually released publicly. Regardless of the NCV rate, or the non-combatant casualty value rate, which in cases was 10 times higher than Iraq. This rate basically gives you, for every value target killed, how many civilians can you kill in this, with reports of sometimes this being 300 to 1. I believe comedian Bill Burr is the one who made a great analogy when he stated words to the effect of, if a school shooter enters a hospital following attacking classrooms, it does not then justify levelling the hospital with a bomb. You have to find another way around this. The hypocrisy of the Western outrage of these attacks versus when Russia then targets an area has been astounding. But I often put this in reverse and say, if Kyiv did to Moscow what Israel did to Gaza, NATO would invade Kyiv or force them to stop it. We see the outrage from Western politicians at Russia's bombing campaign and relative silence towards Israel's. Again, civilians are civilians. The hierarchy of human suffering, the inequality of compassion that we have seen is inexcusable. The very foundation of Western liberalism is inalienable human rights. And these inalienable human rights, they don't pick a race, they don't pick an ethnicity, they don't pick a colour. It's the foundation of that liberalism, is it's inalienable to humans. It became clear that there were very few limits on what Israel would do or where it would go in its goal of defeating its neighbours. From armed operations inside hospitals dressed as doctors, strikes in Beirut with non-combatant casualty value rates that would make George Bush uncomfortable, strikes recently in Qatar, threatening Beijing, blackmailing the US into conducting bunker-busting strikes in Iran against nuclear facilities, effectively starting a campaign that they did not possess the weapons or aircraft to complete. On a side note, we definitely have not seen the end of actions in Iran. And this has left many to ask that why is America seemingly more in on Israel's goals than their own? Not only more supportive, but actively reducing the US global power and reputation by this support, by being kinetically involved. And ask yourself this, how do states like Indonesia see attacks like this, while being told that the US are the protectors of peace, of rules-based order and stability, and that China is the intrinsic, unquestionable, savage enemy? Now, I know there's a lot of nuance we can add here, but the average person doesn't add nuance. They form opinions based on what they see on the surface. And surface level, well, this is why we have seen that support has collapsed. And American first conservatives have been shown largely as hypocrites. This is why, for example, the growing Nick Fuentes-style conservatism has gone from a small part of the conservative environment to now almost the accepted position and, in my opinion, the most popular online conservative speaker. Look at the audience shift in Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens versus someone like Ben Shapiro or Douglas Murray. For these personalities and their audiences, it's becoming glaringly obvious that the amount of influence over the entire government is immense, with many in the media and elected officials being Israel first and America second. Lindsey Graham and Ben Shapiro are perfect examples of this. To university campuses where criticism of Israel is treated more seriously than criticism of America. These growing voices were once on the fringe, and they're now asking the question of, who are you really loyal to? And their growing audiences themselves, they're asking the same, and they're now not the fringe voices. The orators and bloggers questioning this have formed a new group, as Netanyahu would like to say, the woke right. This term is used in an attempt to undermine their opinions or views. or label it as somewhat anti-Semitic or as a left-wing ideal, rather than a response to the current political environment of which we are seeing. There's been a few recent key events that have cemented these ideas for many and collapsed existing narratives. Let's go through them. Firstly, of course, this has been unbelievably multiplied by the obvious cover-up of America's pedo elite, with the Epstein files going from a fact to a myth to now a question not worth the administration's time answering. Meanwhile, the circumstantial evidence clearly points to a compromat operation. Compromat is a Russian word for compromising material in intelligence operations. Not only do the American elites operate as if they've been compromised, but the circumstantial evidence from Ghislaine Maxwell's father being a known Israeli operative, no explanation for Epstein's vast wealth or access to elites, a New York apartment rigged with cameras and audio equipment, flight logs being mysteriously misplaced, and Epstein's supposed taking of his own life within a secure facility that has every measure against self-harm. Guards not present, cameras not on. People are rightfully questioning the story. And in my opinion, an Israeli compromat operation seems like the most likely scenario. And the most successful compromat operation ever run. If I was an intelligence asset who wanted to have complete control over another person, being able to gain material of them with an underage individual, well, that is a silver bullet. And Mossad has a long history with shady offshore operations, honey traps, and compromat. Now, none of this is a smoking gun, but it makes a lot more logical sense than other explanations. Of course, the other explanations, these all fall apart under any scrutiny or rational thinking. There's just too many moving parts for it to be a coincidence. Many point towards an Israeli intelligence operations rather than a Russian or Chinese intelligence operation, due to the way that these elites then act with Israel compared to, say, China or Russia. Trump's obvious hiding of these files was the final straw for many, seeing that there were no limits on influence. Whether it was true or not, this was the final straw for a lot of people. Even while Israel maintained diplomatic relations with Russia and unofficial nuclear weapons with the Samson option if the state is threatened. And if you don't know what the Samson option is, this refers to Israeli nuclear strikes on an adversary, or speculated that this also includes potential strikes beyond immediate adversaries, reflecting mad or mutually assured destruction if there's a risk to the existence of the state. Meanwhile, everything around these nuclear weapons and how obtaining them is very, very grey, to say the least, and especially when the US wanted some level of inspection on these. We've seen over the past few years, but let's go the past 2 years because that's what we're speaking about, dividing lines being drawn between the West and the global South, or commonly said, the West and the rest. And whether it's the war in Ukraine or the war in the Middle East, of course, this speeds up these dividing lines and sets them more in stone. But the situation in Gaza at the international level is the US and Israel and the rest. Much of the Western world, either see this as a genocide or has publicly supported the recognition of a state of Israel, which has not only angered Netanyahu and Trump, but has left them isolated from everyone, thus reducing US soft power and legitimacy globally. If the Epstein list was a turbo boost, the assassination of Charlie Kirk was the Dominic Toretto NOS buttons being pressed that launched people not only into the stratosphere, but into then escape velocity. Last month, we saw the brutal, bloody and public murder of one of the Conservatives' most favourite figures, Mr. Charlie Kirk. Now, who did this is less important than who people believe did this. A crazed, deranged lefty, as reports say, or a foreign intelligence service. Now, there's no smoking gun on this, and the evidence is weak. But people are finding a lot of circumstantial evidence that is crossing their threshold for blame. Remember what I said about nuance can be added, but for a lot of people at surface level circumstances, that's where they then go. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence that is crossing a lot of people's thresholds when you combine with a lot of other factors. The main pillar for this argument is that Kirk was obviously changing his opinion on Israel. There's been some damning messages released by Miss Candace Owens, who has been sharing these to millions of people. And of course, Netanyahu making statements very quickly following his murder. And this murder, this shocked the world. Now, could these factors prior, as far as changing opinions, could it just be a coincidence? Absolutely. And I think that is likely. But this was enough to tip many over that edge and suspect foul play. The Dominic Toretto NOS buttons, as I put it. Was this a politically motivated left-wing shooter or a shot across the bow to silence dissenting opinions to threaten those changing tones? Now, as I said, who did this is less important than who people believe did this. And this also applies here. Even if it wasn't an intelligence operation, I know for a fact many in the conservative community have concern for their own health as if it was. And this is Israel and Mossad's real strength. Their real strength is that their reputation precedes their actions. Intelligence operations are more about optics and opportunity than the operation itself. I think it's unlikely that Mossad took out Kirk. But in my opinion, Netanyahu somewhat actually lent into this theory by making multiple statements, and it wasn't us in his famous statement too. And what this did was this opened up room for people to say, well, maybe it was. Should I shut up? That's what we spoke about. It doesn't matter as much who did it as who people may believe. And definitely, I had people ringing me in this community online, who you would know, saying, what do you think about this? Should I shut up? But I'll say one thing. From all the YouTubers and bloggers I speak to, they are uncomfortable to say the least if it's anything about Israel, more so than any other state. We saw only a few days ago comedian Theo Von recently say, I'll never take my own life. You hear that, Israel? Theo, who's just a shit talker on the internet and a very funny comedian, he got dragged recently for showing sympathy to the situation, or empathy to the situation in Gaza and the civilians. Israel has obviously recognised this trend of bloggers, media and politicians changing their tone. And what we have seen is huge amounts of funding put into fly bloggers, YouTubers, politicians to Israel. From the recent 50 states won Israel, where a representative from all 50 American states went to Israel. We have the photograph I'll show you here. To the very obvious, all these YouTubers or bloggers in the same place, at the same hotel, at the same time. Not only is this pretty damning, I've got anonymous confirmation of this being the case. Allegedly, there's a payment of up to $7,000 per post. I don't have confirmation on that, but it seems to be everywhere you look. I often think, so there's 50 states, won Israel. Australia. Australia is arguably America's closest ally, equal with Canada. If Australia tried to get 50 representatives from all 50 states and have a whole event called 50 States Won Australia, this would be seen as incredibly suspicious and would be called out from Washington. Back to these paid or supported bloggers. So there is a difference in getting payment, but also all getting flown there and put up for free. I guess there's a difference in how it may be seen as, is it paid or is it supported? But again, what I will say is, once you're compromised, you're compromised. And my tip to these guys would be, if you're in Tel Aviv and a girl way hotter than you could ever pull starts talking to you, maybe change your hotel room and keep it in your pants. Although, what I will say is this campaign, in my opinion, observing this has massively backfired. Under all of these posts, the top comments by a mile will be somewhere along the lines of, another $7,000 collected. And people are seeing straight through it. Funny thing is, it's backfired so far that even if it is a post that isn't sponsored, it is taken as if it is paid propaganda. Now, finally, the trend I'm seeing a lot more of is it started here, people questioning this, questioning that, escape velocity on things. But people are starting to question en masse, even much larger narratives. You're probably seeing as much as I, but I've never seen the amount of people, as I do now, across TikTok or Instagram. TikTok's probably going to become a lot less, but across social media, questioning from the Bolshevik Revolution to central banks to the Second World War, questioning historical narratives all the way through that, the Austrian painter himself, and that these questions have moved from like this tiny fringe to more and more mainstream. And that's that escape velocity that I'm seeing people in. In conclusion, this is why I believe Israel may win battles, but it will not win the war, even if this takes place over the next century. The legitimacy of Israeli actions and the one-sided relationship with the US have moved from just the very fringe of the anti-Zionist idea of a few people. This has turned into support of a majority of people going, what the hell is this? And as Kissinger said, again, the conventional army loses if it does not win. The guerrilla wins if he does not lose. And what we may see in the future is a new wave of uncompromised politicians. They may enter politics, or support of Israel in a democratic system may become so unpopular that political leaders cut ties with Israel. And without US support, Israel is a small power surrounded by states that hate them to their core and would exploit an opportunity of weakness at the drop of a hat. We also need to look at the US. As the global influence of the US reduces and the rise of states like China and India, further lines are being drawn. And the US unquestioning support of Israel is a sticking point for many individuals and states. If you honestly believe that the majority of the world stand with Israel, as I see in many comment sections, you are absolutely kidding yourself. This is a very dangerous time. And the reason I bring up changing of narratives and how people are doing this is because it's very easy to start accepting more and more and more once you're pushed in a certain way. So this is a very dangerous time. And of course, this time into the future, this is of course prime time for false flag events or opportunities. That said, I just don't know if the American public or the West in general is buying it anymore. But how far will states go for their survival? Well, the answer is as far as it needs to go. Legends, I hope you have a fantastic day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.